Respond to the federal lawsuit filed by the Western Illinois pastor claiming his First Amendment rights have been violated and that the governor appears hostile to churches by not allowing them to gather. He plans to hold services Sunday. What is your reaction to that?
Sure. Well, first of all, so many of the pastors and faith leaders across the state have been partners with us in working with their parishioners to make sure that they're staying at home and staying safe. And I've been grateful for their partnership in that. These are difficult times for parishioners and for those of us who worship to not be able to access, sometimes in person, your faith leader, especially as anxiety has come over people. Coronavirus is a very serious infection that's in the air. It's around us, and it's caused people to need that kind of counsel. Most faith leaders have found new ways to connect with their parishioners on Zoom conferencing, holding services by teleconference, and I would encourage people to continue to do that. And I would just urge the faith leaders who are concerned about the length of this to just put the health and safety of their congregants first. I think that's uppermost in everybody's mind. It's certainly uppermost in my mind. And I would have everybody focus on the fact that we're still climbing this ladder of hospitalizations and ICU beds being filled. And until we get to the other side, even according to President Trump's plan, we really can't begin to open up until we have 14 days of down cycle of those numbers. And so, we'll continue to work at that and make sure we do the right thing following, the suggestion of the president's plan.
But reaction to the lawsuit specifically and the charges that his First Amendment rights are violated, and really how far will you go to enforce the stay at home if he says he's holding services Sunday?
We've asked everybody to do the right thing, and as I say, parishioners and their pastors really have done the right thing across the state. So, this person is, it's a bit of an outlier, but everybody has the right to sue. And, we've seen in multiple states now, people have filed lawsuits on various things having to do with the stay-at-home order. But we're going to keep doing what we need to do to keep people safe.
Well, to that, we'll stay in this general subject matter because there are a lot of questions about this. A question from Greg Bishop at Centered Square. Several counties have either a sheriff or a state's attorney saying they won't enforce your orders. Why should other counties think your orders are enforceable if other areas are refusing to enforce?
Again, I would point people to the fact that people are still getting infected. More and more people are ending up in the hospital, and more people are dying. We had 141 people die today, and not all of them were in Cook County or Chicago. Some of them were in downstate Illinois. And it's important for us just to pay attention to the fact that until we get to the other side of this, once again, I would point to President Trump's plan and their suggestion put together with national experts, that we really need to be extraordinarily careful until we begin to see those numbers subside.
But I have to follow up, and that is if people are starting to push back and saying, well, we're not going to enforce this, we're going to let people get away with going to church, for lack of a better phrase, by the way, those were my words. What are you going to instruct the state police or enforce state's attorneys and district attorneys in various counties to double down, or no?
What I'm doubling down on is the fact that all the people who live in those counties are being put in harm's way by those who are putting gatherings together of any sort that are going to potentially infect others. And I'm doubling down on the idea that the health and safety of the people of those counties and of all across our state is at risk when people don't follow the recommendations of the scientists, the doctors, the epidemiologists who are telling us that until we see a subsidence of these hospitalizations, of infections, you heard there are more than 2,000, I think 2,500 infections detected today, and that's just a small fraction of those people who are in fact infected who don't know that they are because we haven't been able to test everybody. But we know that there are many people out there that are pre-symptomatic, asymptomatic, and yet have coronavirus. So if you put one of those people in a room full of parishioners, you run the risk that you're going to get a kind of exponential run of this disease, of this infection rather, through a crowd of people that you love and care for.
But I guess what I'm just directly asking is, on behalf of all these folks, is will there be repercussions if there is a blatant defiance in other counties of your stay-at-home order?
Nobody's going to, run in and break up a gathering of churchgoers at that moment, but I will tell you that there are consequences, of course. The state has the ability to enforce orders, but we've been looking to people to do the right thing, and they should do the right thing. And I think the parishioners, by the way, ought to do the right thing and ask those who are faith leaders either not to hold those services or simply ask that they have something online that they can connect to rather than the potential for being infected.